My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm 29 years old. And the day of my daughter's baptism was supposed to be the most sacred, beautiful moment of our lives, a day to celebrate faith, family, and the blessing of our perfect baby girl. But instead, it became the day I found my husband tangled up with my best friend in the church basement, their bodies pressed against the cold stone wall, whispering about how stupid I was and how much longer they had to wait before they could drain my inheritance and disappear together. When I stumbled back up those stairs, tears streaming down my face, ready to scream and destroy everything, my grandmother didn't panic. She didn't rage. She just took my trembling hand, gave me the strangest smile, and whispered 4 words that changed everything. The reckoning is prepared. What happened next was the most brutal, calculated revenge I've ever witnessed, and it all unfolded right there in that church, in front of 200 guests, 2 priests, and my innocent 3-month-old daughter sleeping in her christening gown. If you want to see how my 78-year-old grandmother orchestrated the complete destruction of 2 cheaters in the house of God, smash that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. You won't believe what happens next. It was a perfect Sunday morning in Charleston, South Carolina. The historic St. Michael's Episcopal Church stood proud and beautiful on Meeting Street, its white steeple reaching toward a cloudless blue sky. Sunlight filtered through the ancient stained glass windows, casting jeweled patterns of red, blue, and gold across the polished wooden pews. The scent of white roses and lilies filled the air, mixed with the faint smell of old incense and candle wax that seemed embedded in the very stones of this 200-year-old building. Everything was perfect, too perfect. I would later understand that perfection was just a mask hiding absolute rot underneath. Today was the baptism of my daughter, Isabella Rose Torres, Bella, as we called her. She was 3 months old with my dark hair and her father's green eyes, the most beautiful thing I'd ever created. She wore a family heirloom christening gown, delicate white lace that had been worn by 4 generations of Torres women. My grandmother had carefully preserved it, along with so many other family treasures. My husband, James Whitmore, stood beside me in the church vestibule, adjusting his tie and checking his phone. James was 32, tall and athletic, with that classic New England prep school look that made mothers trust him instantly. Sandy brown hair, those striking green eyes, a smile that could sell anything to anyone. We'd been married for 4 years, together for 6. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, the kind of love story that made other people jealous. He worked in commercial real estate, or so he said. He claimed to be building his own firm, making connections, closing deals. I supported him through everything. When we got married, I used part of my trust fund to help him start his business. When deals fell through, I told him not to worry. When he needed to travel for work, sometimes for weeks at a time, I stayed home alone and told myself this was what wives did. They supported their husbands' dreams. God, I was so pathetically naive. My best friend since college, Vanessa Pierce, was here as Bella's godmother. That had been James's idea, actually. He'd suggested it 6 months ago, right after I got pregnant. "You 2 are so close," he'd said with that charming smile. "Bella should have a godmother who's practically family already." And Vanessa had been thrilled, crying happy tears, hugging me tight, telling me what an honor it was. Vanessa was 28, stunningly beautiful in that effortless way some women have. Long blonde hair, blue eyes, perfect figure. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, always dressed impeccably, always traveling to medical conferences and doctors' offices. She'd been my roommate in college, my maid of honor at my wedding, the first person I called when I found out I was pregnant. I thought she was my sister in everything but blood. I thought she loved me. What a stupid, blind fool I was. My grandmother, Elena Torres, sat in the front pew, dressed in an elegant navy dress with her silver hair perfectly styled. At 78, she was still sharp as a knife, still commanding every room she entered. After my parents died in a plane crash when I was 12, Abuela Elena raised me. She was the family matriarch, the keeper of the Torres fortune, built over 3 generations through shipping, real estate, and careful investments. She was also the most calculating, strategic person I'd ever known. Nothing got past Abuela Elena. Nothing. That morning, as I was getting ready in the church's bridal preparation room, fussing over Bella's gown and my own cream-colored dress, Abuela had watched me with those dark, knowing eyes. "Rebecca, mija," she'd said quietly, "today you will learn who people truly are." I'd laughed nervously. "What do you mean, Abuela? Everything's perfect." "Is it?" she'd asked. and something in her tone made my skin prickle. But then Bella had started fussing, and the moment passed. Before I continue, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you, and if this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Trust me, the revenge gets so much better. Your support means everything to this channel. The baptism was scheduled to begin at 11. By 10:45, the church was filling up with guests. James's parents, cold and distant as always, sat stiffly on the groom's side. They'd never approved of me, the Spanish girl from Charleston who'd trapped their precious son. Never mind that James had pursued me relentlessly, that he'd proposed after only 8 months of dating, that he'd signed a prenup without complaint. My extended family filled the other side, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them part of the sprawling Torres clan that had called Charleston home for over 100 years. They were loud, warm, affectionate, everything James's family wasn't. In the middle of all this, Bella slept peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that her baptism day was about to become a nightmare. Around 10:50, James kissed my cheek. "I need to grab something from the car," he murmured. "Be right back." I nodded, not thinking anything of it. 5 minutes later, Vanessa appeared, looking flustered. Her perfect makeup seemed slightly smudged, her hair a bit disheveled. "Rebecca, honey, I think I left my phone in the parish hall basement. You know, where we were setting up the reception earlier. Can you help me look? I'm terrified I'll miss getting pictures of the ceremony." I glanced at Bella, sleeping so peacefully. My cousin Maria was right there. "Can you hold her for just a minute?" I asked. "Of course," Maria said, carefully taking my daughter. "Go ahead." I followed Vanessa through the church's side corridor. St. Michael's was old and labyrinthine, with narrow hallways and steep staircases leading to various levels. The basement parish hall was where we'd set up tables for the reception afterward, covered in white linens, with a beautiful 3-tier baptism cake as the centerpiece. We descended the worn stone steps, our heels clicking in the silence. The basement was cool and dim, lit only by a few small windows at ground level. "Vanessa, where exactly did you leave it?" I asked, looking around the empty hall. "I think near the storage closet," she said vaguely, walking ahead of me, "in the back." We walked past the reception tables, past the kitchen area, toward the back corner where old church supplies were stored. That's when I heard them. Voices. Low, intimate, urgent. Coming from the small alcove behind the storage area, a space I knew held nothing but old choir robes and broken pew cushions. A man's voice, a woman's breathless giggle. My heart started pounding before my brain could catch up. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I stopped walking. Vanessa had disappeared ahead somewhere. I stood frozen, listening. "How much longer do we have to keep this up?" the woman's voice said. It was familiar. Too familiar. I'm so tired of playing the devoted godmother, the supportive best friend. I want to take a shower. I feel contaminated every time she hugs me. My blood turned to ice. That was Vanessa's voice, my best friend, my daughter's godmother, talking about me. The man laughed, a laugh I knew intimately, a laugh I'd heard every morning for 4 years. "Just a few more months, babe. Maybe 6 at most. Her grandmother is old. The trust fund becomes Rebecca's when she turns 30 in 6 months, and she's already named me as beneficiary in her will. Once that money is officially hers, one little accident, and we're set for life." That was James, my husband, the father of my child. My knees buckled. I grabbed the wall to keep from collapsing. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. But their voices continued, destroying me with every word. "What kind of accident?" Vanessa asked. James's voice grew colder, more calculated. "Could be anything. She's a new mother, sleep-deprived, emotional. Postpartum depression is real, you know. Women do terrible things. Maybe she has a breakdown. Maybe she has an accident while driving with the baby. Insurance pays out double if there's a child involved." I was going to be sick. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. He was planning to kill me and Bella. For money. "And what about the kid?" Vanessa asked, and my heart stopped completely. "Do we really need that complication? We could just, make sure the accident is thorough." James was quiet for a moment. "We might need to keep her. For appearances. At least at first. People would be suspicious if we both survived and the baby didn't. We can always deal with that problem later. Send her to boarding school, whatever." They were talking about murdering my daughter, my 3-month-old baby girl, sleeping upstairs in her christening gown. These monsters were discussing whether it was more convenient to kill her now or later. Something inside me shattered into a million pieces. The woman I'd been, The trusting, loving, naive woman died in that moment. What was born in her place was something cold and furious and absolutely ruthless. I can't wait to get out of this suffocating town, Vanessa continued. Once we have the money, we're gone, right? New identities, new country, just like we planned. Just like we've done before, James confirmed. And that phrase, done before, sent another shock through my system. Before? They'd done this before? To other people? Other victims? Vanessa giggled again, a sound that made my stomach turn. I almost feel bad for her. She's so pathetically trusting. Did you see her face when you suggested I be the godmother? She practically cried with happiness. She has no idea I've been sleeping with you since before you even proposed to her. My vision blurred with tears and rage. Since before he proposed, our entire relationship was a lie. Every moment, every memory, every I love you, all of it had been a performance, a con, a trap. And that baby, Vanessa said with disgust. Thank God she looks like Rebecca. I was terrified she'd come out looking like you, and I'd have to pretend to think it was cute. I almost laughed at that. At least James's biology wasn't in question. Small mercies. You know what the best part is, James said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. That old bat grandmother of hers suspects nothing. She actually thanked me last week for being such a devoted husband and father. Said her granddaughter was blessed to have me. Wrong. Abuela suspects everything. She always has. I realized that. Now remembering her strange words this morning, the look in her eyes, she'd been trying to warn me, trying to tell me in her cryptic way that something was wrong. We should get back upstairs, Vanessa said. The ceremony starts in a few minutes. One last kiss for luck. I heard movement, shuffling, and then silence. They were kissing. Right now, in this church, on my daughter's baptism day, my husband and my best friend were kissing, congratulating themselves on their plan to murder me and steal everything my family had built. I backed away slowly, my whole body shaking. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I stumbled back toward the stairs, and that's when I ran into someone. Mija. It was Abuela Elena. She'd appeared from nowhere, as she often did. Her dark eyes saw everything, my tears, my devastation, my complete destruction. And there was no surprise in her face. None at all. Abuela, I choked out. They're going to kill me. Kill Bella. For the money. I know, she said quietly. I know everything. You know? How? How long have you known? 4 months, she said calmly. Since before Isabella was even born. But why didn't you tell me? Because you would not have believed me, Mija. Your heart was too full of love for them. You would have defended him, made excuses. You needed to see the truth with your own eyes, hear it with your own ears. Only then would you be ready to do what must be done. My grandmother's iron control was both terrifying and somehow comforting. She'd known. She'd prepared. And suddenly I remembered her words from this morning. The reckoning is prepared. Abuela, what have you done? I whispered. What I always do, she said, taking my hand firmly. I protect what is mine. You are mine. Isabella is mine. The Torres family is mine. And no one, no filthy con artist, no traitorous serpent takes what belongs to Elena Torres. Come. It is time. Time for what? I asked, even though part of me already knew. Time for them to face divine judgment, she said, and her smile was absolutely terrifying. Right here, in God's house, in front of everyone they've tried to fool. We have witnesses, we have evidence, and most importantly, Mija, we have the truth. Let me show you what real power looks like. She began walking up the stairs, pulling me with her. My mind was reeling, but I followed. What choice did I have? My world had just collapsed. My husband wanted me dead. My best friend had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. But my grandmother, the matriarch who'd raised me, who'd built an empire, who'd survived poverty and prejudice and every challenge life threw at her, she had a plan. And God help me, I wanted to see these monsters burn. When we reached the top of the stairs, Vanessa was there in the hallway, adjusting her dress and hair, making herself presentable again. She saw me, and her face lit up with that false, sunny smile. Rebecca, there you are. I couldn't find my phone after all. Must have left it in my, purse upstairs. Silly me. Did you find yours? I stared at her. This woman who'd slept in my dorm room, who'd held my hair when I was sick, who'd promised to always be there for me. This woman who was planning to help murder me and possibly my infant daughter. My voice came out flat, emotionless. No, I didn't find anything I was looking for, but I found what was actually there. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. What? Nothing, I said. Let's go. The ceremony's about to start. We walked back to the vestibule together. My legs moved automatically, my face arranged itself into some semblance of normalcy. Inside, I was screaming. James was already there, looking perfectly put together, perfectly innocent. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing my forehead. "Got worried." "Where'd you go?" "Basement," I said. "With Vanessa." She thought she lost her phone. He glanced at Vanessa. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. An entire conversation in that single glance. Did she hear anything? Are we safe? I saw it now. Every secret look, every casual touch, every time they'd volunteered to stay late and help me with something while the other was conveniently around. It had all been there, all along. I'd just been too trusting, too stupid, too in love with my perfect little life to see the predators circling. Abuela appeared at my side, taking Bella from Maria's arms. "Let me hold my great-granddaughter for the ceremony," she said. "You two stand together as parents should." She looked at James and Vanessa with a smile that never reached her eyes. "And you, dear Vanessa, stand close as the godmother. After all, this is your moment too." Something in Abuela's tone made James's eyes narrow slightly, but he recovered quickly, that charming smile sliding back into place. "Of course, Mrs. Torres. We're all so blessed to be here." "Blessed," Abuela repeated. "Yes, let us see exactly how blessed you are." The church bells chimed 11 o'clock. Father Michael, a kind elderly priest who'd known my family for decades, appeared at the sanctuary entrance. "It is time," he announced. "Let us begin this sacred celebration." We processed down the aisle together, me and James, with Abuela carrying Bella, Vanessa walking behind as godmother. The guests stood smiling, taking pictures, completely unaware that half the people in this procession were plotting murder while the other half were plotting revenge. The ceremony began with traditional prayers and hymns. Father Michael spoke about the sanctity of baptism, about welcoming a child into the Christian community, about the responsibilities of parents and godparents to raise this child in faith and love. Every word felt like acid burning through my chest. Responsibilities, faith, love. These people knew nothing about any of those things. Bella woke up during the second hymn and started fussing. I reached for her instinctively, but Abuela shook her head. "I will comfort her," she said. "You must stand with your husband." The way she said husband made James shift uncomfortably. After the hymns, Father Michael invited us to come forward to the baptismal font, a beautiful marble structure that had been in this church for over 2 centuries. "James, Rebecca, and Vanessa, please approach with the child." We moved forward. The guests watched with warm smiles. James put his hand on my back, playing the devoted husband. Vanessa stood close to Bella, playing the honored godmother. And all I could see was a future where I was dead. My daughter was an orphan or worse, and these two monsters were sipping champagne on a beach somewhere with my family's money. Father Michael began the specific baptismal prayers, but before he could continue, Abuela's voice cut through the sacred space like a knife. "One moment, Father. Before we baptize this child and welcome her into God's family, I believe there is something that must be addressed." The entire church fell silent. Father Michael looked confused. "Mrs. Torres, is something wrong?" "Very wrong," Abuela said. Her voice was calm but carried to every corner of the church. "This ceremony is about bringing a child into a community of faith, love, and truth. But how can we do that when lies and evil stand at this very altar?" James's face went pale. Vanessa's eyes widened. "Mrs. Torres," James began, his voice tight. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Abuela asked. "Let me help you understand." She turned to face the congregation, still holding Bella securely. "Everyone here believes they are witnessing a blessed event. A young couple celebrating their daughter's baptism with a devoted friend standing as godmother. They see love, they see family, they see faith." She paused, and the silence was deafening. "They see lies." "Abuela, what are you doing?" I whispered, even though I knew, even though I wanted her to do it. "Telling the truth, mija," she said, "the only thing that matters in God's house." Father Michael looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Torres, perhaps this conversation should happen privately." "No," Abuela said firmly. "It should happen here, now, in front of witnesses, in front of God. Because what I'm about to reveal is not gossip or suspicion, it is documented fact." She nodded to someone in the congregation. My Uncle Ramon stood up. He was a federal prosecutor, serious and unsmiling. He walked down the aisle carrying a large folder. Abuela had prepared for this, for weeks, maybe months. While I'd been naive and trusting, she'd been investigating, documenting, preparing for this exact moment. Uncle Ramon reached the altar and opened the folder. Father, congregation, and most importantly, Rebecca, he said, looking at me with pity. What you are about to hear will be shocking, but I assure you, every word is verified and documented. James's hand dropped from my back. He took a step away from the altar toward the side exit, but two men I didn't recognize stood up from the pews and moved to block it. They were large, serious, and I realized with a jolt that they were probably private security Abuela had hired. "There's nowhere to go, Mr. Whitmore," Uncle Ramon said, "so you might as well stay and face what's coming." James froze, his face transformed from shock to cold calculation in an instant, the mask finally dropping. Vanessa grabbed my arm. "Rebecca, whatever they think they know, it's wrong. I'm your friend." "I would never. Get your hand off my granddaughter," Abuela snapped, and Vanessa jerked back as if burned. Uncle Ramon began reading. James Alexander Whitmore, also known as James Mitchell, also known as Alexander White. Wanted in connection with fraud cases in 3 states, Oregon, Nevada, and Colorado. Vanessa Marie Pierce, also known as Victoria Martin, also known as Marie Pearson. Accomplice in said fraud cases. Together, they are suspected in the deaths of 2 previous marks. Though evidence was insufficient for prosecution in those cases, the church erupted. Gasps, shouts, people standing up to see better. James's parents sat frozen in their pew, their faces ashen. My family looked ready to riot. But Uncle Ramon wasn't finished. In each case, the pattern was the same. James, using various identities, would identify and court wealthy women. Vanessa, posing as a friend or relative, would befriend the victim separately, gaining trust from another angle. They would marry the victim, gain access to financial accounts, and then, once maximum access was achieved, arrange an accident that would leave James free to inherit. He held up documents, photos, evidence. "This is Claire Morrison from Portland, Oregon. Died in a house fire 3 years ago, 6 months after marrying James Mitchell. Her estate of $1.2 million went to her grieving widower, who disappeared within weeks. This is Amanda Chen from Las Vegas, drowned in her own bathtub 2 years ago after marrying Alexander White. Another $800,000, another disappearing act. The photos showed women who looked disturbingly like me. Dark hair, similar age, similar background. James had a type. He targeted women like me, women with money and family wealth, women who were trusting and romantic and believed in love. I was just the latest mark in a long line of victims. And Vanessa was always there, I realized, staring at her frozen face. In the photos Uncle Ramon was showing, there was always a blonde woman in the background. At the wedding, at social events, sometimes identified as a cousin, sometimes as a childhood friend. Always close enough to influence, to manipulate, to help set up the final trap. "How?" I finally managed to ask. "How did you find all this?" "Your grandmother hired investigators the moment you announced your engagement," Uncle Ramon said. "She had concerns from the beginning. When you insisted on moving forward, despite her reservations, she decided to let the marriage happen, but never stopped investigating. The moment you became pregnant, she intensified efforts. She knew time was running out. She knew they would make their move soon. Every conversation has been monitored." "Mija," Abuela said. "Your phones, your computers, your home security cameras." I heard every word they said. I know exactly what they planned. She looked at Vanessa with absolute contempt. "Including your charming conversation just now in the basement about whether my great-granddaughter was too much of a complication to keep alive." Vanessa's face crumbled. "Rebecca, you silent," Abuela commanded. "You have no right to speak her name. You are filth. You are a serpent who disguised herself as a friend to get close to prey." She turned to James, who was now looking for any possible escape route. "And you are worse than filth. You are evil. You married my granddaughter under false pretenses. You planted your seed in her body while planning her death. You stood in this church and made sacred vows you never intended to keep." Father Michael, who had been standing in shock this whole time, finally found his voice. This is monstrous. How could you? How could anyone?" James's charming mask was completely gone now. In its place was something cold and reptilian. His eyes scanned the room, calculating odds, looking for weaknesses. "You can't prove intent," he said finally, his voice hard. "So we talked about finances. So what? Couples discuss money, friends gossip. None of that is illegal." Uncle Ramon smiled grimly. "You're right. Intent is hard to prove, which is why we didn't rely on conversations alone." He pulled out another document. This is a falsified death certificate already prepared in Rebecca's name, with her date of death listed as 3 months from now. We found it in your locked office safe, along with forged documents transferring her trust fund to yourself as beneficiary. Another document. This is a life insurance policy you took out on Rebecca 6 months ago without her knowledge, using a forged signature. $2 million payable on accidental death. And this, he held up a small evidence bag containing a prescription pill bottle, is a bottle of insulin you purchased illegally. Rebecca is not diabetic. But a diabetic emergency, say an overdose of insulin, can look like many things, including sudden postpartum complications. The room spun. He'd been planning every detail, down to the method of murder, down to the timeline, down to the forged documents that would make my death and my money transfer look legitimate. Your previous victims weren't as fortunate as my niece, Uncle Ramon continued. They had no one to protect them, no one to investigate, no family with resources to uncover the truth. You got away with murder, twice, but not this time. Father Michael made the sign of the cross. Lord, have mercy. He stopped, unable to find words adequate for what was unfolding in his church. The security guards moved closer to James and Vanessa. Other people I now recognized as plainclothes police officers stood up from various pews. Abuela had orchestrated all of this, turned my daughter's baptism into a trap, and these monsters had walked right into it. James tried one last move. He lunged toward me, grabbing my arm. Rebecca, listen to me. This is all a misunderstanding. Your grandmother hates me. She's always hated me. She manufactured this evidence because she never thought I was good enough. You know me. You love me. Tell them this is all wrong. I looked into those green eyes that I'd once found so beautiful. Now I saw them clearly, empty, calculating, predatory, a shark's eyes. I pulled my arm free. I don't know you, I said quietly. I never did. The man I loved never existed. You're just a monster wearing his face. That seemed to hit him harder than anything else. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Not remorse, never remorse, but perhaps surprise that I'd finally seen through the disguise. Vanessa tried a different approach. She dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Rebecca, please. We made mistakes. But I do care about you. Our friendship meant something. I never wanted it to go this far. I looked down at this woman who'd shared my secrets, who'd held my hand through heartbreak, who I'd trusted with the role of godmother to my precious child. Liar, I said simply. You've never cared about anything except money. And now, turning to face the congregation, I said loudly, now everyone knows exactly what you are. Uncle Ramon signaled to the plainclothes officers. James Whitmore, Vanessa Pierce, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity fraud, and numerous other charges. As the officers moved forward with handcuffs, James's control finally snapped completely. He shoved one officer, trying to run, but Abuela's security team was ready. They grabbed him, slamming him against the marble baptismal font. The same font where my innocent daughter was supposed to be blessed. He fought like a trapped animal, screaming obscenities, his carefully constructed image utterly destroyed. The congregation watched in horrified fascination. This was nothing like the peaceful baptism they'd expected. Vanessa didn't fight. She just collapsed, sobbing hysterically. But I noticed her eyes darting around, still calculating, still looking for an angle, still trying to figure out how to manipulate her way out. Some people are broken so deep down that even when caught, they can't stop scheming. As the officers cuffed them both and began reading their rights, Father Michael approached me. His elderly face was pale with shock. My child, I am so sorry. If I had known, if anyone had suspected, I know, Father, I said. No one could have known. That's what they do. They're professional predators. He made the sign of the cross over Bella, who was miraculously still sleeping through all of this chaos in Abuela's arms. This innocent lamb. Thank God she has been protected. Thank God your grandmother's wisdom prevailed. Abuela stepped forward. Father Michael, the baptism. Can it still happen? After all this? Father Michael looked uncertain. This is most irregular. The godmother. I will stand as godmother, Abuela declared. I am Isabella's family. Her blood, her protection. If anyone has the right to make vows before God to protect this child, it is I. Father Michael nodded slowly. Yes, that is proper. Let us cleanse this sacred space and complete what we came to do. As James and Vanessa were dragged up the aisle, the congregation parted like the Red Sea, everyone pressing back against the pews to avoid any contact with them. People spat on the ground after they passed. Curses followed them in Spanish and English. This was my family, my people. The Torres clan didn't forgive betrayal, and they certainly didn't forgive threats against children. At the church doors, James turned back one last time. His face was twisted with rage and something else, genuine shock that his perfect plan had failed. "You bitch!" he screamed at Abuela. "You fucking interfering old bitch! You've ruined everything!" My grandmother smiled. "No, mijo. You ruined yourself. I simply made sure you faced justice." He was dragged out, still screaming. Vanessa followed silently, her face blank now. "Shut down!" The doors closed behind them with a resounding boom that echoed through the church. Silence fell. 300 years of sacred space seemed to exhale. Father Michael walked to the baptismal font and began new prayers. Prayers of cleansing, of purification, of driving out evil. The congregation joined in, their voices rising in Latin phrases I barely understood but felt in my bones. When the prayers ended, Father Michael gestured us forward again. "Come, let us baptize this child properly, with love, with family, with truth." I stepped forward, but my legs nearly gave out. The adrenaline was leaving my system, and the reality of what had almost happened, what would have happened if not for Abuela, was hitting me like a truck. I would be dead. Bella would be dead or orphaned. And those monsters would be spending my family's blood money somewhere tropical, laughing about how easy it had been. Abuela steadied me, her thin arm surprisingly strong. "Stand tall, mija. You are Torres. We do not break." So I stood tall. I held my daughter as Father Michael poured holy water over her tiny head 3 times. "I baptize you, Isabella Rose Torres, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Bella woke up then and started crying. But it was the healthy, annoyed cry of a baby who'd gotten cold water on her head. Not the cry of a child in danger. She was safe. We were safe. The congregation broke into applause. Not the polite golf clapping of a normal baptism, but real enthusiastic applause. They'd witnessed something extraordinary, not just a baptism, but a deliverance. After the ceremony ended, the reception in the basement went forward. People needed to process what they'd seen, needed to talk, needed to celebrate that. Justice had been served. The baptism cake was cut. The champagne flowed. But it felt less like a baby celebration and more like a victory party. My family surrounded me constantly, protective and warm. No one mentioned James's name. He'd been erased from this family as if he'd never existed. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the church with Abuela and Bella, the 3 Torres women, 3 generations. "Abuela," I said softly. "How did you know?" "From the very beginning," she sighed, adjusting Bella in my arms. "When you first brought him home, something felt wrong. He was too perfect, too charming, too eager to please an old woman who held the family money. Men like that, in my experience, always want something. But you were so in love, so happy. I could not destroy that without proof, so I hired investigators, and what they found, it turned my blood cold." She reached over and touched Bella's tiny hand. "When you told me you were pregnant, I knew time was running out. They would strike soon. A new mother is vulnerable, exhausted, easy to make an accident look natural. So I prepared. I had your home monitored. I had their every movement tracked. I gathered evidence. And I planned this day. Why here? I asked. Why in the church? Why in front of everyone? Because, mija, Abuela said, evil thrives in darkness. It relies on secrets, on privacy, on victims being too ashamed to speak. I wanted to expose them in the light, in front of God, in front of the community. I wanted everyone to see their true faces. That way there could be no manipulation later. No, he said, she said. No possibility of them talking their way out. 200 witnesses saw the truth today. More importantly, she looked at me with fierce love. I wanted you to see the truth, not from my mouth, but from theirs. You needed to hear what they planned, how little you meant to them, how disposable they considered you and Isabella. Only then could you truly be free of the lie you were living. She was right. If she'd just told me, I would have defended James, made excuses, believed his denials. I had to see it myself, had to hear them discussing my murder like it was a business transaction. That's when I truly believed. When I truly understood that my marriage, my friendship, my entire life, for the past 4 years had been a calculated con from the very beginning. The trial would come later, the legal proceedings, the evidence presented in court, the inevitable convictions. Uncle Ramon assured me they'd both face significant prison time, at least 20 years, possibly more if they could be definitively connected to the previous deaths. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that I was alive. My daughter was alive. And the monsters who'd planned to destroy us were in handcuffs instead of at a celebratory lunch, stealing my inheritance. I will never trust that easily again, I said quietly. I will never let someone in like that again. Good, Abuela said. Trust is earned. Love is precious. But family, blood, loyalty, these things are sacred. Remember that. I looked at Bella, sleeping peacefully now, unaware of the danger she'd been born into and the grandmother who'd saved her life before she could even understand the concept of danger. She would grow up knowing this story, knowing that love without wisdom is dangerous, that trust without verification is foolish, that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones with knives behind their backs. But she would also know that family protects family, that strong women raise strong women, that the Torres name meant something, carried weight, came with responsibility and power. She would never be naive like I'd been. Never be a mark, never be a victim. Before I continue with what happened in the days and months after that terrible baptism, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you, and your support means everything. Trust me, the aftermath of this revenge is just as satisfying as the exposure itself. See you in a moment. The day after the baptism, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at Abuela's house. I'd moved back immediately. There was no way I was staying in the home I'd shared with James, the home that was probably wired and monitored for their convenience, the home where he'd planned my death in clinical detail. Every memory there was poison now. Everything I'd thought was real had been performance. The clothes in his closet were costume pieces. The photos on the walls were props. The man in my bed had been a stranger wearing a mask. Bella was in a bassinet next to me, still sleeping. I watched her chest rise and fall, this tiny, perfect person who had no idea how close she'd come to being orphaned or worse. My phone had been buzzing constantly since yesterday. Dozens of messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, some genuinely concerned, some just wanting gossip. I ignored them all except for one. Uncle Ramon. Call me when you're ready. We need to discuss next steps. I called him at 8 in the morning. His secretary, already briefed, put me through immediately. Rebecca, how are you holding up? He asked. His voice was gentle. He'd always been my favorite uncle, the one who treated me like an adult even when I was a child. I don't know, I admitted. I feel numb, like this happened to someone else. That's normal, he said. You're in shock. It will hit you in waves over the coming weeks. Let it come. Don't fight it. And find a therapist immediately. You'll need professional help processing this level of betrayal. I will, I promised. What happens now? Legally, I mean. Now we build the case, he said. James and Vanessa are being held without bail. Flight risk is too high. There'll be a rain tomorrow. The charges are substantial. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery. And we're working with authorities in Oregon, Nevada, and Colorado to connect them to those previous deaths. How strong is the case? I asked. Very strong, he said. Your grandmother did excellent work. The evidence is overwhelming. But I need to warn you, these people are professionals. They'll have lawyers. They'll try to make deals. They'll try to claim everything was just talk, no real intent. We need you to be prepared to testify, to tell your story, to face them in court. I can do that, I said, and I meant it. I can face them. Good girl, he said proudly. You're stronger than they ever understood. That was their mistake. They saw a soft target. They didn't see Torres steel underneath. One more thing, Rebecca, your marriage. It's not legally valid. James used a false name on the marriage certificate, so you were never actually married to him under the law. That should have been a relief, but instead it was one more violation, one more lie. Even my marriage certificate was fake. He'd left himself an escape route from the very beginning. What about Bella? I asked, fear clutching my heart. Is she legitimate? Does he have any legal claim? None, Uncle Ramon said firmly. Paternity can be challenged, but given his criminal charges and the documented plan to harm both of you, no court will grant him custody or even visitation. Isabella is yours completely, your family, your responsibility. He has no rights. I exhaled. Thank God. And Vanessa? She signed papers as godmother yesterday. She signed them as Vanessa Pierce, not her real name, Uncle Ramon said. Those documents are also invalid. She has absolutely no legal connection to Isabella. She's nothing. A stranger, a criminal, nothing more. Over the following days, more details emerged. The investigators Abuela had hired were thorough, and what they'd found was even worse than what had been revealed in church. James and Vanessa, it turned out, were step-siblings who'd grown up in foster care together. They'd learned early that charming the right people, telling the right lies, could get them anything they wanted. By their late teens, they'd graduated to romance scams. Small at first, then increasingly sophisticated. The two victims who'd died, Claire Morrison and Amanda Chen, had both been married to James for less than a year before their convenient accidents. Local police had investigated both deaths but found no evidence of foul play. James was always elsewhere when the accidents happened, always had alibis. And without bodies showing signs of violence, without witnesses, the cases went cold. But Abuela's investigators found connections. Both women had recently come into significant inheritances before their deaths. Both had made James the primary beneficiary of their estates. Both had friends or relatives who later said they'd had concerns about the husband, but were told they were being paranoid or jealous. And in both cases, there was a blonde woman in the background. Cousin Victoria in Oregon. Childhood friend. Marie in Nevada. Always Vanessa, always close enough to monitor the situation and help manipulate the victim. They were a team. A well-oiled machine of deception and murder. And I was supposed to be victim number 3. One afternoon, about a week after the baptism, I was feeding Bella when Abuela came into the room with a thick folder. "Mija," she said, "there is something else you need to see?" My stomach dropped. What else could there possibly be? She sat beside me and opened the folder. Inside were photographs, not of James or Vanessa, but of me. Hundreds of photos. Me leaving the house, me at the grocery store, me at doctor's appointments when I was pregnant, me sleeping in my own bed, unaware someone was photographing me through the window. James had been documenting my life, I realized with horror, creating a record of my routines, my habits, my schedule, planning exactly when and how would be the best time to stage my accident. "There's more," Abuela said quietly. She showed me a detailed calendar. Dates were marked in red. My 30th birthday was circled multiple times. "Exactly 6 months and 3 weeks from now," Abuela explained. "That's when your full trust fund becomes available." He was waiting for that exact date. The moment the money was yours, free and clear, no longer held in trust, that's when he planned to kill you. The insurance payout plus the inheritance would have totaled nearly $6 million. He'd mapped out my murder on a calendar like it was a business deadline. I felt bile rise in my throat. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. Everything came up, the shock and horror and violation of it all. When I came back, pale and shaking, Abuela held me. "He is a demon," she whispered. "Both of them are demons. But demons can be cast out, mija. And these will be cast into cages where they belong." The arraignment happened. I didn't attend, couldn't bear to see their faces yet. But Uncle Ramon reported that both entered pleas of not guilty. They were going to fight this, going to force a trial, going to make me relive everything in front of a jury. Fine, I thought. Let them try. They'd underestimated me once. They wouldn't get a second chance. As the weeks passed, more victims came forward, or rather, families of victims. A woman from Texas whose daughter had dated someone matching James's description before disappearing with her entire savings. A man from Arizona whose sister had married a charming architect and then died in a suspicious car accident. The pattern went back at least 10 years. At least 10 years of James and Vanessa destroying lives, stealing money, leaving devastation in their wake. "How many victims?" I asked Uncle Ramon during one of our many meetings. "How many people did they hurt?" "We may never know the full number," he admitted. "Some victims are too ashamed to come forward. Some probably don't even realize they were targeted. These people are very, very good at what they do." I corrected. "We're good at it." Past tense, until Abuela stopped them. Uncle Ramon smiled grimly. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman. What she did, gathering that evidence, setting that trap, it probably saved dozens of future victims. These two will never hurt anyone again." 3 months passed. I started therapy as promised. Twice a week, I sat in a comfortable office and talked about betrayal, trust, trauma, and healing. My therapist, Dr. Reyes, was patient and kind. "This was not your fault," she told me repeatedly. "You were targeted by professionals. They studied you, learned your weaknesses, and exploited them. That's not naivety. That's being human." But I should have seen it, I argued. There must have been signs. There probably were, she agreed. But they were signs designed to be invisible. That's what makes them so dangerous. They create cognitive dissonance, making you doubt your own instincts. You felt something was wrong, but he always had an explanation. That's gaslighting. That's what abusers do. James wasn't just a con artist, Dr. Reyes explained. He was a psychological predator. He understood human nature, understood what women like you valued, kindness, romance, family, and he manufactured those things. He became exactly what you needed him to be. That's not something you could have predicted or prevented without prior warning. And my best friend, I whispered. How did I not see that? Because she was equally skilled, Dr. Reyes said gently. She played a different role, the supportive girlfriend, the sister figure, and she knew exactly how to manipulate female friendship dynamics. She made you feel special, chosen, understood. That created loyalty. That made you defend her even when small inconsistencies appeared. Over time, with Dr. Reyes's help, I began to separate the trauma from the shame. I hadn't been stupid. I'd been targeted. There's a difference. Stupid is ignoring red flags you understand. Targeted is being manipulated by experts who make sure you don't see the red flags at all. I also started attending a support group for victims of financial fraud and romance scams. Sitting in a circle with 10 other people who'd been conned in various ways, I realized I wasn't alone. One woman had lost her retirement savings to a man who claimed to be a stockbroker. Another had been catfished online and sent money for years to someone who didn't exist. A man had been scammed by a woman claiming to have cancer who needed help with medical bills. We all had the same feelings: shame, stupidity. How did I not see it? But the group leader, herself a survivor of an elaborate con, reminded us constantly, these people are professionals. They do this for a living. It's not an even playing field. You're not weak for being fooled. You're human for believing people are fundamentally good. I found strength in that, in knowing that my capacity for trust, for love, for seeing the best in people, those weren't weaknesses. They were what made me human. James and Vanessa had weaponized those qualities against me, but that didn't make the qualities themselves bad. It made them evil for exploiting them. Bella thrived through all of this. At 5 months old, she was hitting all her milestones, smiling, laughing, reaching for toys. She had no memory of that terrible baptism day, no memory of the monsters who'd planned her death. She was pure and innocent and perfect. Sometimes I'd hold her and cry, thinking about how close I'd come to losing her, how close she'd come to never having a life at all. But Abuela would find me in those moments and shake her head. No tears, mija. Tears are for grief. We have no grief here. We have victory. We saved her. We saved you. Now we move forward. And slowly, painfully, I did move forward. I hired a lawyer and began the process of legally dissolving my non-existent marriage. I changed all my bank accounts, security codes, everything. I moved permanently into my own wing of Abuela's sprawling estate. I started taking courses online, working toward a degree in criminal justice. If I was going to survive this, I was going to understand how predators think, how to spot them, how to stop them. 6 months after the baptism, the trial finally began. The courthouse in Charleston was packed, media everywhere. This case had captured public attention in a way few did. A wedding day confrontation was one thing, but a baptism day, arrest of murderers planning to kill a mother and baby, that was the stuff of nightmares and made-for-television movies. I walked into that courthouse, wearing a black suit, my head high, Bella in Abuela's arms behind me. I was ready to face them, ready to tell my story, ready to make sure they never walked free again. James and Vanessa sat at the defense table in orange jumpsuits. They looked smaller somehow, diminished. The charm, the beauty, the sophisticated personas, all of that was gone. What remained were just two damaged people who'd learned to hurt others before they could be hurt themselves. James wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes down, whispering to his lawyer. But Vanessa stared right at me, and there was no remorse in her eyes, no apology, just cold calculation. Even now, even caught, she was looking for an angle. The prosecution's case was devastating. They showed the jury every piece of evidence: the forged documents, the illegal insulin purchase, the prepared death certificate, the insurance policy, the recordings of James and Vanessa discussing my murder. And then they brought in the families of the previous victims. Claire Morrison's parents, broken and gray, testified about their daughter's sudden death and the husband who'd disappeared. Amanda Chen's brother, who'd never believed the drowning was accidental, testified about his suspicions and the police who'd dismissed them. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with Abuela's voice in my head. "Stand tall. You are Torres. We do not break." The prosecutor was gentle, walking me through my relationship with James, how we met, how he courted me, how he proposed, how I'd trusted him completely. Then she asked the hard question. "Ms. Torres, can you tell the jury what you heard in the church basement on the day of your daughter's baptism?" I took a deep breath and told them. Every word, every terrible plan, every cold discussion of whether my baby was worth keeping alive. By the time I finished, several jurors were crying. The judge had to call a recess. When we resumed, it was the defense's turn. James's lawyer tried to paint me as a scorned woman, someone who'd misunderstood a private conversation. But Uncle Ramon had prepared me well. "The recordings don't lie," I said calmly. "Those are their voices. Those are their words. You can try to reinterpret them, but the jury heard what they heard. I heard what I heard." Vanessa's lawyer tried a different approach. She suggested that Vanessa had been manipulated by James, that she was a victim too. But the prosecution destroyed that theory by showing evidence of Vanessa operating cons on her own before she'd ever met James. She was no victim. She was a willing, enthusiastic participant. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict took less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Both of them. James showed no emotion when the verdict was read, just stared straight ahead. But Vanessa broke down sobbing, still performing, still trying to manipulate someone, anyone, into feeling sorry for her. At sentencing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium and looked directly at both of them. "You tried to kill me," I said, my voice steady. "You tried to kill my daughter. You stole years of my life by making me believe I was loved when I was just being set up for slaughter. You destroyed my ability to trust. You tainted every memory I have of the past 4 years. But here's what you didn't count on," I continued. "You didn't count on my family. On a grandmother who loved me enough to investigate when her instincts said something was wrong. On an uncle who fought for justice. On a community that rallied around me. You thought I was alone. You thought I was weak. You were wrong." I turned to the judge. "These people are predators. They've done this before. They'll do it again if given the chance. I am asking you to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law, not for revenge, for protection, so they can never hurt another family the way they hurt mine." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, nodded. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "you are sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Ms. Pierce, you are sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Additionally, both of you are ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims." The gavel came down. It was over. They were led away in chains. James finally looked at me as he passed, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret, not for what he'd done, but for getting caught, for underestimating the naive little target who'd turned out to have a family of wolves protecting her. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. I gave a brief statement thanking my family, thanking the investigators and prosecutors, and urging other victims of romance fraud to come forward. "You are not alone," I said to the cameras. "You are not stupid. You were targeted by professionals, but you can survive. You can heal. You can make sure they face justice." My story became national news. Within days, I was contacted by 3 different production companies wanting to make a movie. A true crime podcast devoted an entire season to the case. I was invited to speak at conferences about financial fraud and romance scams. I said yes to some of it, not for fame or attention, but because I wanted other potential victims to hear my story, to learn the warning signs, to understand that fairy tale romance that seems too good to be true usually is. 1 year after the baptism, I stood in the same church for another ceremony. Bella's first birthday celebration, not a baptism this time, but a blessing. A recognition that this child had survived, had thrived, had a whole, beautiful life ahead of her. Father Michael smiled as he blessed her. "This child is surrounded by love, by protection, by the grace of God. She will grow strong. She will grow wise. And she will always know that her family fought for her before she could even understand what fight meant." Abuela stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "1 year, mija. You have survived 1 year. I had survived. I'd gone to therapy. I'd testified. I'd watched my attackers be sentenced. I'd started to rebuild my life. I'd even started dating again, carefully, very carefully, a kind professor at the local college who understood trauma and never pushed. My trust was broken, but not beyond repair. My capacity for love was damaged, but not destroyed. And Bella, sweet Bella, was thriving. She'd just started walking, taking those wobbly first steps with all the confidence of someone who didn't know she'd almost never gotten the chance. I thought about James and Vanessa sometimes, locked in separate federal prisons, serving decades for their crimes. I wondered if they felt any remorse, if they understood the magnitude of what they'd tried to do. Probably not. People like that rarely do. But I also thought about the other victims, Claire and Amanda, who hadn't been as fortunate as me, who hadn't had an Abuela Elena investigating in the background, who died thinking they were loved, never knowing they were just marks in an elaborate con. I thought I owed it to them to live fully, to love openly, even with appropriate caution, to make sure my daughter grew up understanding both the beauty and danger of the world, to never let the existence of predators stop her from being human. 3 years after the baptism, I graduated with my degree in criminal justice. I started working with the district attorney's office as a victim advocate, specializing in romance fraud cases. I helped other people navigate the trauma I'd experienced, helped them understand they weren't alone, helped them find the strength to testify, to face their abusers, to reclaim their lives. It was healing work, for them and for me. Bella was 3.5 now, bright and funny and full of life. She called Abuela her best friend. She loved Uncle Ramon's magic tricks. She was learning Spanish and English simultaneously. She had no memory of that terrible day, no memory of the monsters who'd planned her death. She just knew she was loved, completely, unconditionally, fiercely loved, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. One afternoon, I received a letter, prison mail, from Vanessa. My hands shook as I held it. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, but another part needed to see what she had to say after 3 years of silence. I opened it. Inside was a single page, her handwriting still as elegant as ever. "Rebecca," it began, "I know you probably hate me. You have every right to. What James and I planned was monstrous. I won't insult you by claiming I was forced or manipulated. I made my choices. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I did it anyway. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that in my own twisted way, I did care about you. You were the first Mark who felt like a real friend. That's why I hesitated sometimes, why I almost told you to run, but I didn't, and that's on me. Your daughter's lucky to have you. I see the news stories about your advocacy work. You've turned your pain into purpose. That's more than I ever managed to do with my life. I'll die in here. I know that. 40 years at my age means I'll never see freedom again. But maybe that's justice. Maybe that's what I deserve. I hope you find happiness, real happiness, the kind I only ever pretended existed. Vanessa." I read it twice. Then I put it in a folder with all the other case documents. I didn't respond, didn't acknowledge it. She wanted something from me, absolution maybe, or connection, or just acknowledgement that she'd existed as a human and not just a monster. But I had nothing to give her. She'd made her choices. Now she'd live and die with the consequences. That's justice. 5 years after the baptism, Bella started kindergarten. She wore a little backpack almost as big as she was and waved goodbye without a single tear. She was confident, secure, loved, exactly what I'd wanted her to be. Abuela, now 83, was slowing down but still sharp as ever. She attended every school event, every milestone, every moment. "Rebecca," she said to me one evening as we watched Bella play in the garden, "I am so proud of you. Not for surviving. Any Torres can survive. But for thriving, for turning poison into medicine, for making sure your daughter knows both strength and gentleness. That is wisdom. Thank you, Abuela," I said, tears in my eyes, "for everything, for saving my life, for teaching me what real strength looks like." She waved a dismissive hand. I did what any grandmother would do. I protected my own. "The rest, mija, you did yourself." 7 years after the baptism, I got married again. Not to the professor I'd dated briefly, but to a detective I'd met through my advocacy work. Miguel was patient and honest and understood trauma because he'd seen it in his job every day. He never pushed, never demanded, just waited until I was ready. Our wedding was small, just family, just friends we'd carefully vetted and known for years. No more leaping in blindly, no more trusting without verification. Some people might say I'd become cynical. I preferred to think I'd become wise. Bella, now 7, was the flower girl. She took her job very seriously, scattering petals with great concentration. Abuela, who could barely walk now, sat in the front row and cried happy tears. "This is how it should be," she whispered to me before I walked down the aisle. "Real love, built on truth, worth the wait." Miguel and I said our vows, simple, honest promises. "I promise to always be truthful," he said, "even when the truth is hard. I promise to trust carefully," I said, "but completely once earned." It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. The years continued to pass. Bella grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young woman. At 13, I told her the full story, about her baptism day, about the monsters who'd planned to kill us, about the grandmother who'd saved us. She listened with wide eyes. "Mom," she said quietly when I finished, "I could have died before I even got to live." Yes, I said, you could have, but you didn't. And now every moment of your life is precious. Never forget that. Never take it for granted. She never did. She grew up careful but not afraid, skeptical but not cynical, strong but not hardened. Everything I'd hoped she'd become. James died in prison. I heard about it through Uncle Ramon. Heart attack at 57. Too much stress, too much anger, a body that finally gave out under the weight of all that evil. I felt nothing when I heard. No satisfaction, no grief, just emptiness. He'd stolen years of my life. I wouldn't give him my emotions in death. Vanessa was still alive, still serving her sentence. I heard she'd found religion in prison, taught classes to other inmates. I didn't know if it was genuine or another performance. It didn't matter. She was where she belonged. Abuela passed away peacefully at 93, surrounded by family. Her last words to me were clear and strong. "You made me proud, mija. You took the worst day of your life and turned it into armor. That's Torres' strength. That's what survives." I held her hand as she slipped away, grateful beyond words for this woman who'd saved me, who'd raised me, who'd shown me what real love and protection looked like. The Torres Foundation for Fraud Victims was established in her honor. It provided free legal support, therapy, and financial assistance to victims of romance scams and financial fraud. It was funded by the restitution money from James and Vanessa's convictions and by donations from grateful families we'd helped. My daughter Bella, now 16, sometimes volunteered there. She'd heard enough survivor stories to understand how her life could have been different, how lucky she was, how important it was to help others who weren't as fortunate. One evening, she asked me the question I'd been waiting for. "Mom, do you ever regret it?" "Regret what, sweetheart? Marrying Dad. The first one, I mean. If you hadn't, I wouldn't exist. Would that have been better?" I pulled her close. "Never," I said fiercely. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Yes, your biological father was a monster. Yes, he tried to hurt us. But he gave me you, and I would go through all of that pain again 1,000 times if it meant getting you." She hugged me tight. "I'm glad Abuela saved us. I'm glad we got to live. Me too, baby, me too." Now, as I stand here at 50 years old, looking back on that terrible baptism day 21 years ago, I understand something I couldn't have understood then. That day broke me, completely shattered the naive, trusting woman I'd been. But what grew in her place was stronger, wiser, more resilient. I've helped hundreds of victims of romance fraud. I've testified before Congress about strengthening laws. I've written a book that's helped thousands more understand the warning signs. My daughter is in college, studying psychology, planning to help trauma survivors. My husband Miguel still makes me laugh every day and has never once given me reason to doubt him. The Torres family continues to thrive. The con artists who tried to destroy us are dead or imprisoned. And I survived. More than survived. I built something meaningful from the ashes of that terrible day. So if you're watching this and you've experienced something similar, if someone you loved turned out to be someone you never knew, if you've been betrayed and broken and are wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, I want you to know this. You will survive. You will heal. You will be stronger than you ever imagined possible. But you need to do 3 things. First, surround yourself with people who love you unconditionally. Family, real family. Not the family you choose in moments of naivety, but the family who proves themselves through action. Second, seek help. Therapy, support groups, legal advocates, whatever you need. Don't try to do this alone. Third, turn your pain into purpose. Use what you've learned to help others, to warn them, to show them they're not alone. The monsters are real. James and Vanessa exist in many forms, in many places, targeting vulnerable people every day. But so do the protectors, the Abuela Elenas of the world who won't let evil win without a fight. And sometimes, the victims become the protectors. We become the ones who spot the red flags, who warn the vulnerable, who fight for justice. That's my story. That's how my daughter's baptism became the day I caught my husband plotting my murder with my best friend. That's how my 78-year-old grandmother orchestrated the most brutal public exposure I've ever witnessed. And that's how I survived, healed, and eventually thrived. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story gave you the justice you needed to see, check out the other videos on screen. They're just as satisfying. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me your thoughts. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps this channel going and helps me continue sharing stories that matter. Remember, you are stronger than you know. The people who try to destroy you, they underestimate that strength at their own peril. Never let them see you break. And if you do break, let the breaking remake you into something harder, sharper, more dangerous to those who would harm the innocent. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.